You are very welcome to this Q&A about the explosion in Polish territory that killed 2 Polish civilians against a wider context of brutal terroristic bombardment of Ukraine. That is really important not to lose out of our lens of focus, even though, of course, the kind of incident that happened in Poland, even though it isn't going to, in this case, lead to escalation, could easily have led to considerable escalation. How do you rate the official response? Exceptionally. The official response of the major powers, give or take a few. We're going to put Ukraine aside for later. I think the Latvian foreign minister tweeted the wrong thing straight away, that this is a Russian missile before we knew. But broadly speaking, the response of the major powers has been exemplary. And it's an extraordinary thing that human beings, who are limitlessly creative but also limitlessly destructive animals, can achieve such calm and constructiveness in terms of their relations mediated by institutions which they share, as that pertains to issues of global safety. So there is the cautiousness of the response is quite extraordinary. It shows that human beings do different things, that one of the things that they do is politics, and that sometimes human beings can do politics really well. And if you're a realist about the sort of ill-assorted combination of human capacities and dispositions, then that's got to be very moving and very inspiring. Now, Poland itself reacted in the Polish government, whatever you think of it, reacted in a way that it seems to be inspired trust from partners and was broadly, appropriately cautious. How do you rate the public response? Well, I think one of the lessons is that first reports are often wrong, and it's important not to jump too quickly. And there is a kind of semi-reality for a lot of people about wars like this. And even people who are feeling genuine outrage and genuine compassion toward what Ukrainians are going through, even for some of those, it's a soap opera. It's half a soap opera, this whole experience. Because that's what's revealed when people come out and start screaming straight away, Article 5, Article 5. That reflects not a constructive position of support for Ukraine. It reflects that you're taking the war like you take soap operas. That's to say, you take them half seriously. And you know that you are protected from the consequences of what's inside the television screen. It's never going to come for you. So there's a kind of identity-driven narcissism to all of the screams that, quite frankly, asked for World War III on social media, above all on Twitter. And that's very sick. It's really sick. And it's predictable, so it's not a big deal. But it's unhealthy. It's a kind of magical thinking. No, it's not a reflection of how proudly you support Ukraine and how beautiful you are. If that's what you did, it's worth reflecting on. Now, actually, before I come to the next question, it's worth saying something about our strategy here in the light of this. A strategy for talking to ourselves about this war. You know what the position is that I recommend. It's a very strongly pro-Ukrainian position that even goes beyond the remarkable support that the United States has been giving Ukraine. I think that I have recommended a position that says, well, we may need to support Ukraine even more to achieve a victory even more quickly. Of course, victory needs definition. We're going to leave that for now. But it's very important that this position that I think the majority of people watching this video probably take, And you're very welcome if you don't take that position. You're very welcome to this conversation. But it's very important, this position, which I've advocated in limitless videos on the chat channel and in a small number of videos on the main channel, is a dangerous position. Now, it's not necessarily more dangerous than the other position. In fact, there is good reason to think the other position is more dangerous, a position of accommodation with Russia. And that's to do with a special story we tell about what seems to us to be the program in the Kremlin. The Kremlin is engaged in a kind of pattern of escalation, and quite frankly, that pattern is now simply tied to the existence of the regime. As long as it has capacity, it's going to carry on engaging in escalation. Now, recognizing all of that doesn't mean that there is an easy choice for you. It doesn't mean that there is zero chance that the kind of support that we advocate for Ukraine isn't going to get us all killed. I mean, that's entirely possible. And so it's important to be slow and humble in our intransigent commitment to the position that clearly seems to be the right one here. And the right one doesn't just mean ethically. In fact, in the main, it doesn't mean ethically. It means strategically. So we've got to be humble about the fact that there aren't good choices, and that the right choice doesn't mean that it's a safe choice. That's a healthy thing for us to understand. What do you think of the Ukrainian response, and in particular of Arestovych's response? Well, Arestovych's response, I thought, was absolutely exceptional, because he is one of the few major figures, at least in the reaction of his that I saw, who just didn't prejudge what caused it. And then he went on and essentially called for greater NATO involvement and potentially even NATO intervention, and potentially even closing the sky. And that's his job. He's a propagandist for his country that's fighting a defensive war, and he's very good for his country. I thought his response was, as far as Ukrainian interest goes, absolutely impeccable, and he didn't undermine Ukraine by jumping too quickly to a premature conclusion, but many of the other representatives of the Ukrainian government jumped to a premature conclusion, and that's probably unconstructive. But again, even what we know now may evolve. So we ourselves too shouldn't develop an enormous degree of confidence that we already know everything that matters and everything that there is to be known. So respect to Arestovych. How do you rate the journalistic response? Well, there is a fascinating ethical question, for Ukrainian journalists. Because there is a tension there between supporting your country and, I suppose, being a journalist with integrity and not screaming too quickly exactly what you think has happened before you know. And I don't think it's a conflict within journalistic ethic, because journalistic ethics clearly indicate you shouldn't jump to conclusions, even if the fate of your country is at stake. So that's an interesting balance I'm not going to comment on further, but the response of many Western journalistic institutions has been disgraceful. And that's why it's important, again, to look at which journalistic institutions responded impeccably, and to not lose commitment to institutions that behaved badly, but to be aware that they behaved badly and to encourage them to behave better in the future. In this country, in the UK, the Telegraph ran a headline on the main page that I still can't believe is true, but it seems to be true. Russian missiles land in Poland, something like that, 4-word headline, it basically said that. And I would like to think that other publications, for instance, The Economist or the Financial Times, would not run a headline like that. So this is very, very important, because you're not undermining your trust on a particular story when you play fast and loose. like that. You're undermining your trust in general. And when you're undermining your trust in general, you're not just undermining the trust of the particular journalistic institution you represent. You undermine trust in journalism altogether, and that way you undermine trust in the viability of truthful discourse, and that way you undermine, god damn it, trust in democracy. How has Russian propaganda responded? Well, Peskov praised the moderation of US response. Russian propaganda has responded in a mixed and ill-assorted way. They haven't quite known what to say. Many of them took to their Telegram channels and simply said various kinds of different provocative things that went in different directions. The idea that seemed to hold a lot of their efforts together was, oh, hang on, if this actually wasn't us, if this is a Ukrainian air defense missile, then wouldn't it be convenient for us to claim that things that we clearly did, we didn't do, particularly in the last day? So they started having conversations about how they really didn't bomb civilian infrastructure in Kiev, which they clearly did. So each to their own. Russian propaganda did different things and just tried to exploit this. But I think what is actually interesting is that outside of the Z patriotic, Z radical Telegram channels, calls for escalation with NATO have been relatively, not seldom, but they've been less than you might expect, which is interesting. Is a direct confrontation between Russia and NATO likely, and consequently is a closing of the sky likely? This is uncertain, but unfortunately what this incident on Polish territory teaches us is that the same thing in a less lovely format is about to happen at some point again. So that's a worry. So yes, if it is true that these weren't Russian missiles, well then they could be Russian missiles next time. So I think that certainly the position of the Biden administration is that you avoid a no-fly zone at all costs, unless it's absolutely necessary and extreme circumstances arise. But nothing can be ruled out at this point. And again, we've got to recognize that escalation shouldn't be thought of in terms of one side deciding whether to do A or not to do A, another side in response deciding to do B or not to do B. Escalation is much more like a snowball where events can, if you like, format the behavior. Contingent events can format the behavior of different sides and agencies and agents. So that's where we're at. I think we're not moving in the direction of a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia, but this is wrong. We're not moving in the direction of that inexorably, but are we drifting closer to that as a possibility? Yeah, unfortunately we are. And that's one of the ongoing risks during this war. Is the Russian bombardment of Ukraine going to achieve anything for Putin except making Ukrainians more determined? There's a very simple answer. You can't do that to a country, accompany that behavior by genocidal rhetoric, which is still going on, and then expect that they're going to be willing to negotiate, And the human capacity to endure challenges and suffering is extraordinary when there is an external and existential threat. What Ukrainian cities are going through now is horrendous, but let's be frank. Would they tolerate, would they endure going through something much worse and still be as vehemently and even more vehemently against compromising with Putin? Yeah, why not? We've got to look at the brackets of what humans tolerate. For instance, in this capital city, during the Blitz, which only lasted a few months, probably about 20,000 people died, and that unified this city. And that level of bombardment is particularly bad, but it's a drop in the ocean compared to other things we saw during the Second World War. So the idea that you are going to get the Ukrainian population to feel like they want to give up by causing them death and suffering and hardship, well, that idea isn't going to work. Lots of love and talk soon.